And I yield back.
Does any other member wish to speak on the Crockett Amendment? Seeing none, the question is on the Crockett Amendment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. And Ms. Crockett.
I'd ask for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote has been requested and ordered. As previously announced, further proceedings on the question will be postponed. All right. Do any other members wish to be recognized for the purpose of offering an amendment?
I have an amendment at the desk, Mr. Chairman.
Will the clerk please report Raskin number 2 amendment?
Raskin Amendment number 2 to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 4435 as offered by Mr. Raskin of Maryland.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read. I reserve a point of order. The ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
And thank you kindly, Mr. Chairman. My amendment would exempt programs and associated budgetary levels that pertain to the defense of Ukraine against the imperialist invasion of Ukraine by Vladimir Putin and the Russian military. As you know, Mr. Chairman, this is a war that has divided the world as the autocratic, authoritarian, dictatorial nations of the world have supported Russia's bloody, imperialist, atrocity-filled invasion of Ukraine. The free and democratic nations of the world have rallied to the side of Ukraine, which is defending its sovereignty in a just war of self-defense against Putin's forces. So this is about wartime, and we would not want anything in this legislation, which obviously I've already expressed my misgivings over, but we would not want anything to endanger our support for the people of Ukraine and the forces in Ukraine that are resisting this autocratic aggression against the people there and in defense of their own sovereignty and in defense of their democracy. We know that Putin decided to go to war precisely because it was such a threat to his form of autocratic and kleptocratic rule to have an example of a free democratic society that is based on the values of pluralism and tolerance and the education and the nurturance of all the people of the society. That was just too much of a threat to him. So America has been a critical and indispensable ally, as it always has been, in struggles for democracy and human rights against authoritarian and totalitarian aggression. And I don't know if this was an oversight on the part of the drafters, but certainly we would not want anything in this legislation to endanger American support for the ongoing struggle of the Ukrainian people to defend their country. So with that, I urge approval of this amendment on a unanimous and bipartisan basis to demonstrate continuing congressional support for the people of Ukraine. I know that there are a handful of members who've expressed support for Vladimir Putin and are questioning support for Ukraine. I know that there are people who have been attacking President Zelensky, but I don't know that any of them are on this committee. They're certainly not in the room right now, and I hope that all of us could agree to adopt this amendment together. And I yield back to you.
I recognize myself now for 5 minutes. Again, I must unfortunately oppose this amendment for the same reason I oppose the ranking member's first amendment. It would undermine the purpose of the bill, which is intended to force Congress to do oversight of the programs it creates and funds and reauthorize them regularly. If there's any place the Congress should be conducting regular oversight within the appropriation authorization committees, it is with the financial assistance the American taxpayer is providing for the Ukrainian conflict. Times of international conflict should require more, not less, congressional oversight. Secondly, today the House is considering the Annual Defense Authorization Act, one of the few authorization bills Congress considers every year. The invasion of Ukraine prompted an urgent response and significant financial investment to the part of our Defense Department, but this was never intended to turn into a blank check on spending and put spending on an autopilot. The House Foreign Affairs Committee, as well as the Armed Services Committee, should carefully weigh the future of unauthorized programs and do a full assessment of our priorities from year to year as circumstances change. While the U.S. continues to prioritize foreign assistance to our allies, we cannot use this as an excuse for runaway spending without sufficient analysis or oversight. For these reasons, I oppose the Raskins number 2 amendment. Do any other members wish to be recognized?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Goldman.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question. I don't understand how this is an oversight issue. This is a automatic reduction by 10% of any program that has been authorized, and then that authorization expires. So at some point, it was authorized. And in the you rail, and my colleagues on the other side frequently rail against wanton and excessive spending, but what this bill is targeting is the administration, the executive branch, actually being quite judicious in its spending, because if there remains money from previously authorized programs, then that necessarily means that the executive branch has not been wantonly spending. And so the notion that you oppose this amendment simply because it provides an exemption from this bill makes no sense. It especially makes no sense when we cannot foresee what exactly will happen in the brutal attack violating all sorts of international law by the dictatorial regime under Vladimir Putin against a democracy next door to it. And Mr. Raskin made a comment that this is about international warfare. That is true, but it is also fundamentally about democracy. And for this committee and this body to try to limit the ability of the Department of Defense or other executive branch agencies to defend democracy around the country, which I might add has a very significant impact on our own national security, notwithstanding many comments from colleagues on the other side, you are handcuffing our ability to support Ukraine against a brutal, dangerous, unwarranted, unprovoked, and a wholly improper attack by a dictatorial regime. And so the Republicans can couch objection to this amendment in a vague concern that it is contrary to the purpose of the bill, which doesn't really explain why a bill can't have an amendment, and because of your designation or your determination that it can be dealt with in the NDAA, but we're dealing with it right now in this bill, in addition to the NDAA. And I think it is shameful that the Republicans on the other side of the aisle are effectively taking the side of Vladimir Putin against the democracy in Ukraine by refusing to exempt any funding to support Ukraine, our democratic ally, in its fight for its own freedom, its own democracy, against authoritarianism, which is a fight that the United States must never, ever cease to participate in. And I yield back.
All I will respond by saying is just because the Republicans don't want to provide a blank check to Ukraine doesn't mean that Republicans support Vladimir Putin. Does any other member? Your time's expired. Your time's expired. Any other member?
So you can respond, but I can't respond to you?
Chair recognizes Mr. Lynch.
I'd like to yield necessary time to my colleague.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. We're not talking about a blank check. We are talking about money that has already been authorized for this purpose, but has not been used by the expiration of that authorization. So it is not an open checkbook to Ukraine or any other authorized program. There is a specific amount that was authorized that was not used by the time of that expiration of authorization. And what you are saying here is false. It's not a blank check. It's a check that has already been authorized by Congress, that the administration has the discretion to use as it sees fit. And so I wholly object to the characterization that it is a blank check to Ukraine. It is not. And I yield back to Mr. Lynch. Thank you for
Reclaiming my time, and I yield additional time to the ranking member.
And I want to thank the very distinguished gentleman from Massachusetts. But just a quick postscript to what our colleague from New York just pointed out. It's not just that the money has already been authorized or the program has been authorized, it's that the money has been appropriated. We're talking about money that's already been voted on in a bicameral fashion, presented to the president under the Constitution, and that has gone out the door. But the claim here is that if the underlying authorization had technically expired, even though the expenditure of the money was appropriated and voted on in proper constitutional fashion, that should be revoked, that should not be possible. And that's obviously an attempt to throw a monkey wrench into the way that Congress has acted for decades under both Republicans and Democrats controlling the gavel. And to me, it smacks of this continuing effort that began with Steve Bannon to demolish what he called the administrative state or the deep state, or essentially democracy. And that's really what's at stake here, both in America and in Ukraine. Because democracy needs to have procedures and rules and traditions for operation. And they want to take a wrecking ball to all of them so that the government shuts down the way that the Republican caucus itself seems to be in a completely dysfunctional and broken down mode. I don't want the government of the United States to operate with the extremism, fanaticism, and dysfunctionality that we've seen on display within the GOP caucus. And that's precisely what this bill would accomplish at this point. So we are talking about the defense of democracy here, as well as the allies of the United States in Ukraine. We do not want to endanger our ability to support the people of Ukraine with appropriations that have already been made by Congress to support that just war of self-defense against Putin's invasion. President Biden has said numerous times that the autocrats of the world have told him, like President Xi, that they don't think democracy can work in this century. It's subject to too much division and polarization. It's subject to too much extremism and fanaticism. You need tough guy dictatorship to make it work. And there are those who want to fulfill the predictions of the autocrats and see democracy break down. And we cannot allow that to happen. If we think there's a real problem with the way the interaction between authorizations and appropriations works in Congress, let's have some hearings. Let's analyze it. There are people who study these things. Let's not just, come down on the whole thing with a sledgehammer. Let's analyze it, and let's proceed in a thoughtful and deliberate way. But in the meantime, let's not endanger our support for people who are fighting for their democratic sovereignty against an autocrat's invasion. And I thank the gentleman from Massachusetts yielding. I'd be very curious to know what his thoughts are on this, too.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Look, I've had a fair opportunity on many occasions to travel to Ukraine, and I honestly feel that our funding assistance to that sovereign nation is highly consistent with the ideals of our own democracy here at home. And I fully support every last dollar that we have committed to the Ukrainian people to maintain their freedom and their democracy. And there's nothing better that we could be doing than fighting the gangsterism that's going on in Eastern Europe right now. So with that, I yield back.
Chair recognizes Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My comment's going to be very, very brief. I've heard my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. I'm not getting involved in the discussion about Ukraine, but I'm very frustrated when I hear members of Congress talk about a democracy. We live in a republic, and I think it is really important that we remember that we live in a republic. The fact that we are here as representatives of the people we represent, and when we pledge allegiance to the flag, we pledge allegiance to the republic for which the flag stands. So we don't live in a democracy, we live in a republic, and I think it's important that that be pointed out occasionally. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Will the gentlelady yield?
Yes, sir.
Down here. So is it your belief that the United States is not a democracy?
I'm just call your attention to the fact that we pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic for which it stands.
Oh, but you just said that a republic we are a republic, not a democracy. So do you
I
believe?
said we are a republic. Thank you.
Any other members wish to speak? Seeing none,
I do.
Mr. Frost.
Thank you. I yield my time to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Frost. I appreciate the distinguished gentleman from Texas. I just wanted to weigh in on the distinguished gentlelady from North Carolina's last remark, because it seems as if when we talk about the defense of democracy around the world or the defense of democratic institutions in America, we now often hear this refrain, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. And of course, in the strict sense, that's true. A republic, of course, is just a representative democracy. It's where the people elect their own representatives, because we don't have a Capitol building that will hold 400 million. The country does not operate like a New England town hall meeting, but rather we elect representatives under Article 1 of the Constitution to the House and also to the U.S. Senate. In that sense, that's true. We're a republic, but we're a democratic republic, and we're although we began as a slave republic of white male property owners over the age of 21, in fact, we've evolved to become a far more democratic republic with the addition of the 15th Amendment, which banned race discrimination in voting after the Civil War, the 17th Amendment, which gave us direct election of U.S. senators instead of state legislatures doing it in 1913, the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote and to run for office, which women didn't have before. The 23rd Amendment gave our friends in D.C. the right to participate in presidential elections. The 24th Amendment banned poll taxes. The 26th Amendment lowered the voting age to 18. So the whole trajectory of American constitutional development has been towards making the republic a more democratic republic and a more perfect union. And we have stood up for democracy and human rights all over the world. Fellow democratic republics, again, not New England town hall meetings, although, some of those things exist in certain parts of America at the local level, but governance by the people, what the great founder of your party, Abraham Lincoln, described in his visionary terms as government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Like, that's been the tantalizing dream of America. So the idea that we would somehow set a republic at odds with a democracy makes no sense. We've struggled to become an ever more democratic republic. And when we say we're a republic, that doesn't mean we don't recognize the civil rights and civil liberties of the people. Now, in Eastern Europe, as Mr. Lynch was saying, there is a kind of authoritarian gangsterism at large. And a lot of it revolves around Hungary, where they're in the process of building something they call illiberal democracy, which means democracy, mob rule without rights, without liberties for the people, and an attack on minorities, whether it's religious minorities or racial minorities or LGBTQ minorities or whatever. But it's time for us to bring back together the idea of popular democracy with Republican institutions. Because when we elect people, we send them to go and to fight for a more perfect union for everybody. So I appreciate the gentlelady's point that we have Republican institutions, and I appreciate Mr. Goldman's point that we are very much a political democracy striving to become ever better and for a more perfect union, which is built into our mission statement, the preamble of the Constitution. And I thank you for yielding, and I would welcome your thoughts, too, on this, Mr. Frost, since I know you've been so involved in trying to deepen the meaning of democracy in America.
No, thank you so much, Mr. Ranking Member, and I agree with everything that was just said. I think it's important that we continue to fight for democratic values around the entire world, especially here at home. There are folks within this committee, I would argue, and within this chamber in the House of Representatives that it seems to me like they're fighting against democracy here at home when we talk about our voting systems, when we talk about the ability for people to be able to cast their ballot. A similar conversation we were just having around local laws here in D.C. So to say that being a republic is at odds with being a democracy is just not true, and I yield back.
All right. Any other members seek recognition? Seeing none. The question is on the amendment. I don't even remember who offered the amendment. By Raskin, number 2. All those in favor of the Raskin number 2 amendment say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to.
Could we have a recorded vote on that one, Mr. Chairman?
The gentleman requests a recorded vote. Recorded vote will be ordered as previously announced. Further proceedings on the question will be postponed. Does any other member seek recognition for the purpose of offering an amendment? Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
Will the clerk please report?
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to